What's up, everyone? Today is February 26th of 2025. Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about the death of actress Michelle Trachtenberg, known for her roles on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Gossip Girl, at the age of 39. So as always, we'll be looking at the numerology and synchronicity with this story. And what I want to focus on for the decode is how this is connected to not only the television series Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which Michelle starred in for about 3 years, but how this is also synced to the World Trade Center, which back in the year 1993 was bombed on this very date, February 26th, the same date that it's being reported Michelle passed away. We'll also be looking at how this connects to another bombing, the bombing of the Georgia Guidestones. As much like the World Trade Center, the Georgia Guidestones are another famous symbol of Yale's Skull and Bones Society. Now, rather interestingly, when I made the thumbnail for this video, I put the World Trade Center here on the right and had it pointing at the moon. Well, after I finished the thumbnail, this reminded me of another video I made back in 2023 for actress Suzanne Summers, which was also synced to the World Trade Center and the moon. Well, this is certainly no coincidence, because Suzanne's last name was Summers. In the television series Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Michelle Trachtenberg played a character named Dawn Summers. If you measure from the death of Suzanne Summers to the death of Michelle Trachtenberg, you get the digits in the date of the 9/11 attacks, the 11th of September 01, 1191, from Suzanne Summers' death to the passing of the actress who played Dawn Summers. This same duration is also 500 days. Using triangular numbers, in the language of Gematria, the word sacrifice equals 500. And we're going to talk about how this connects to the year 2001. 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which is the exact phrase that appears on Wikipedia, also has Gematria of 2001 in this cipher. But I want to take a look again at the word sacrifice, because this Gematria seems to be the driver behind today's ritualistic news story. Notice how in English Standard Gematria, the cipher which most closely mirrors ancient Hebrew Gematria, 1 through 9, 10 through 90, and 100 through 900, the word sacrifice equals 226. This is identical to today's date, February 26th, or 226. In the standard alphabetic order, which is probably the easiest cipher to understand, each letter being assigned a number 1 through 26. Notice how sacrifice equals 73. And today's date, 226, has primary numerology of 73, 2 plus 26 plus 20 plus 25. In reverse reduction, sacrifice equals 62. And check this out. The 62nd prime number is 293. Michelle's full name, Michelle Christine Trachtenberg, sums to 293 in the standard alphabetic order. Again, the 62nd prime number. Well, measuring from the date that she first ever appeared in Buffy the Vampire Slayer which was an episode called Buffy versus Dracula, airing back in September of 2000. We find that she died exactly 293 months after the date of her first appearance on the show. And we're going to be looking a lot at this date. Again, September 26th of 2000. Keep this one in mind. Now, certainly there's other riddles to unpack, as Michelle was an actress in many television series. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to talk about Buffy, since this is the show that's listed in most of the headlines for this news. The fact that her name is Michelle is also worth noting, because her co-star on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the main character, was another Michelle, Sarah Michelle Gellar. Notice how Sarah Michelle Gellar was born on a date with primary numerology of 114. 4 plus 14 plus 19 plus 77. In Gematria, the name Buffy equals 1014. In Sumerian Gematria, which is the standard alphabetic order, multiplied by 6, the name Sarah Michelle Gellar also equals 1014. And measuring between these two actresses' birthdays, Sarah Michelle to Michelle Trachtenberg, you get exactly 101 months and 4 weeks. The same 4 digits in 1014, syncing up with Gellar's birth numerology. So next up, let's talk about how this is all synced up with the World Trade Center. Now, once again, Michelle passed away on February 26th, which is the same date in history that the World Trade Center was bombed. A little over 8 years before the 9/11 attacks, there was another major terrorist event, this resulting in the deaths of just 6 people. The man who owned the World Trade Center complex at the time the Twin Towers were destroyed is named Larry Silverstein. And you have to appreciate that his name, Larry, has standard gematria of 9/11, like the date they were destroyed. But in the alphabetic order, the name Larry Silverstein equals 226. Again, matching today's date. Michelle was 39 years old when she died. And if you measure from Larry Silverstein's birthday to the date of her death, you get exactly 39 weeks. The reverse of 39 is 93. And Larry Silverstein is currently 93 years old. Remember how significant of a number 93 was during the World Trade Center attacks on 9/11? Of course, we had Flight 93 crashing in Pennsylvania on that same day. We also had one plane strike the 93rd floor. The second plane struck at 9:03. George Bush then addressed the nation at 9:30 a.m. This was just a huge number for the attacks. Well, if you measure from the 93 World Trade Center bombing to the debut of Dawn Summers on Buffy, you get 93 lunar phases. A lunar phase measuring the time it takes between new moon and new moon. So we will look a lot at these lunar counts because the moon is very important here, as it's essentially in the logo of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, as I showed on my thumbnail. The 93rd prime number is 487. And just yesterday, Michelle Trachtenberg turned 487 lunar phases old. So how many years has it been since the bombing in New York City? We find that today is exactly 32 years after the Twin Tower bombing. And this stands out because measuring from her debut on Buffy to the date of her death is exactly 302 lunar phases. Her first episode that she appeared in was called Buffy vs. Dracula, which equals 320 with capital letters. That first episode aired 3 years and 200 days after the show originally premiered. On the date of the 9/11 attacks, Sarah Michelle Gellar was 2 days shy of turning 302 lunar phases old. When you write out World Trade Center bombing, it sums to 131, which is the 32nd prime number. And exactly 32 years later, this woman dies exactly 302 lunations after her series debut. Another important 131 is ritual human sacrifice. But next up, I want to show you a very fascinating lunar alignment for her debut episode. Now, first I want to point out that if you measure from Michelle Trachtenberg's birthday to Sarah Michelle Gellar's, we find their birthdays are 185 days apart. And 185 is the ordinal gematria of World Trade Center. 185. On the date she made her premiere in Buffy the Vampire Slayer as Dawn Summers, Michelle was exactly 185 lunar phases old. But there's another lunar connection for this date. So here we see the lunar count, right? 185 lunar phases exactly. But there's also another count connected to the moon called a sidereal month, which is a couple of days shorter. And her premiere on Buffy was also exactly 200 sidereal months after she was born. So 185 lunar phases and 200 lunar orbits. Well, in the same alphabetic order, Georgia Guidestones equals 200. Back in the year 2022, the Georgia Guidestones were bombed and later destroyed that same day, July 6th of 2022. So more on that in a little bit. But also, if you instead measure from her first episode on the series to the series premiere of Buffy, notice how you get 185 weeks. And it was also 200 days after the anniversary of the show's premiere. 185 and 200. Numbers connecting to the two big skull and bone symbols, the World Trade Center and the Georgia Guidestones. So I thought, what if you add the gematria of her common name to her character's name? Michelle Trachtenberg, Dawn Summers. And in Latin and Standard Gematria, you get 2001, like the year of the 9/11 attacks. And you also get 2021. Now, these two ciphers Standard and Latin Gematria, they're always going to have the same last digit. Latin is the same as Standard 1 through 9, but then you'll notice it uses an ancient Latin version of the alphabet. So it's a little bit different, but the last digit always matches. So this cannot equal 2022. 2022 is the year that the Georgia Guidestones were destroyed. So yeah, this number is one off, but of course, in Freemasonry, we have the rule of Kollel, which technically states that 1 is not a number and can be added or subtracted from any gematria value. So for all intents and purposes, this 2021 is 2022. And again, these are the 2 years that these 2 occultic symbols were destroyed. When Dawn Summers first appeared on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, it was 11 months and 16 days before the Twin Towers were destroyed on 9/11/01. Remember, Suzanne Summers was born on October 16th, which is kind of like an upside-down 9/11. I guess it would look like that. When you remove these zeros, you get a 9/11. World Trade Center sums to 1110 in Sumerian. These are the same 3 digits in her birthday, the 11th of October, or 11/10. The World Trade Center was destroyed on the date, leaving 111 days in the year. New York, summing to 111 in ordinal. September 11th is also the 254th day of the year. When Trachtenberg died, she was 2,054 weeks old. Skull and Bones also has this 254. But next up, I want to talk about the number 138. This is an important number I've talked about in the past, connected to the divine feminine. The divine feminine, represented by the planet Venus. I think it's Venus Rose that sums to 138. Remember, Venus completes 13 orbits of the Sun in the time it takes Earth to complete 8. Michelle Trachtenberg died exactly 138 weeks after the Georgia Guidestones were bombed. In reverse standard gematria, the name Buffy equals 1308. Buffy was created by writer-director Joss Whedon, whose name equals 138. And when Buffy premiered, Sarah Michelle Gellar was 1,038 weeks old. In satanic gematria, the cipher built around the number 666, Michelle Christine Trachtenberg equals 1308. The World Trade Center equals 1308 in Sumerian. And Michelle Trachtenberg died 138 days after her birthday. This means she also died a span of 228 days before her next birthday. Buffy the Vampire Slayer has the 228. Michelle Trachtenberg Dawn Summers, 228. Death also equals 228. And there's a couple more connections with death as well. Liver failure 138. Thank you, Cody, in the chat for pointing out yet another 138. This is apparently what she died of. The news is telling us that Michelle had her liver transplanted, either like within the past year or two, I believe. And so this is thought to be what's caused her death, liver failure, 138. All right, so to close this out, I want to talk a little bit more about how this connects to the Skull and Bones code. And then we can do a little bonus decode on this weekend's NASCAR race, since I got it right this week, based on the numbers, of course. We'll talk about that towards the end. So notice how Vampire Slayer sums to 65 like Yale. Now, this is not a huge connection, but the 65th prime number is 313. Michelle died 31 months and 3 weeks exactly after the Georgia Guidestones were bombed. She was born 3,103 days after Sarah Michelle Gellar, who was 313 months old when Buffy the Vampire Slayer ended. Trachtenberg passed away 313 sidereal months after the 9/11 attacks. And remember, those attacks were in 2001, connecting to her character's Gematria. Now, in reduction, these two combined names sum to 140. Skull and Bones sums to 140 in reverse. The World Trade Center was bombed on the same date, February 26th, which also had numerology of 140. Measuring from the anniversary of the home of Skull and Bones, Yale, October 9th to the date of her death was 140 days. Yale is also 323 years old. And Michelle died 32 weeks and 3 days before her birthday. Buffy the Vampire Slayer lasted for 323 weeks. But look at their ages when Buffy the Vampire Slayer ended. Sarah Michelle Gellar was 322 lunar phases and 23 days for the series finale of that show. So you have the 322 and the 223. The show ended 32 lunar phases and 21 days after Dawn Summers' first appearance. So very close to another 322. Whether you write out collapse of the World Trade Center or just the World Trade Center, they both sum to 322, the Skull and Bones number. Meanwhile, the Georgia Guidestones opened on March 22nd, the date written 322 or 223. 223 like skull and crossbones in the alphabetic order. So the end of this riddle brings us to the Pi Day eclipse. On March 14th, or 314, we will have our first total lunar eclipse in 2.5 years. And it just so happens to fall on Pi Day, 314. Think about how we are currently in the year 25. And in the alphabetic order, pi equals 25. Well, pi also equals 16 in reduction. Michelle died 16 days before the Pi Day eclipse. 16 is also the reduction value of Yale. And both of these numbers, 223 and 322, both equal 106. Skull and Bones is headquartered at 64 High Street. Now, this 64 is chosen for a darn good reason. If you multiply 32 times 2, you get a product of 64. In Satanic Gematria, Skull and Bones equals 604, while Secret Society equals 640. And on the date Michelle died, Sarah Michelle was exactly 640 sidereal months old. On the date of the Pi Day eclipse, Michelle Trachtenberg would have been exactly 527 sidereal months old. And 527 is Skull and Bones with the ampersand. Skull and Bones, 527. And of course, these are the same 3 digits if you instead write the word "and" out, 572. And just to prove the importance of the moon, if you look at Sarah Michelle Gellar's birthday, notice how she was born under Brown lunation number 671. Buffy the Vampire Slayer lasted on air for 6 years and 71 days. How incredible. The character's name, Dawn Summers, also equals 1230 in standard Gematria. Yale University has this 1230 in Sumerian. Skull and Bones equals 1047 using the Fibonacci cipher. In reverse and Latin, the name Dawn Summers equals 147 and 1470. For just even more Skull and Bones connections, right? And don't forget, the reason the Skull and Bones code is so important right now is because of the current lunation. Today is the very last day. See this? Today is the last day of lunation 1263. 263. Order of the Skull and Bones, 263. Skull and Crossbones, 263. Even the word Masonic equals 263. Buffy the Vampire Slayer aired for 2,263 days, from the series premiere to the series finale. One more thing I probably should mention is that from the World Trade Center bombing in 1993 to the date that Dawn Summers first appeared on Buffy was exactly 7 years and 7 months. And Sarah Michelle Gellar was born in the year 77. World Trade Center equals 77 in reduction. So does September 11th. So, guys, no question about it. You know, we get this death of Suzanne Summers. I made this video in October of 2023. And this was all about the incredible 9/11 connection. And I'll be honest, I did not know why Suzanne Summers was connected to the World Trade Center at the time. However, after the election in November, Donald Trump named Susie Wiles as his new chief of staff. Susie Wiles. And look at Susie Wiles' maiden name. Summerall. Susie Summerall, right? A lot like Suzanne Summers. Suzanne Summers starred in a television sitcom called Step by Step. And in this show, her husband was Patrick Duffy. Well, right after Donald Trump named Susie Wiles his chief of staff, he then named Sean Duffy as his transportation secretary, right? And if you look up Sean Duffy, we find that his middle name is Patrick. Sean Patrick Duffy. And Patrick Duffy was born in the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin is where the show Step by Step takes place. See this? Port Washington, Wisconsin. And in Latin Gematria, not only does Donald have that 119, but Donald J. Trump is just one off of 1190, or another 119. So, it sounds crazy, but this is what's going on, right? Tributes to old sitcoms that a lot of kids these days probably have never even heard of. But when you understand the occultic language of Gematria, the skull and bones code, occultic numerology within dates, we find that all of these things are truly connected. Larry knows this. That's why he didn't show up to work on time on September 11th, 2001. All right, so with all that numerology out of the way, I just want to point out, guys, that in my second race of the season, or my second pick of the NASCAR season, I already picked a race winner. That's right. After winning more than 50% of my Formula One bets last year in 2024, I decided to attack NASCAR this year. And I made a pick for the Daytona 500, Tyler Reddick. Tyler Reddick ended up getting second place in that race. And this week, I made a video just a few days ago, in fact. Let's pull this up real quick. On my channel, if you watch this video called Back to Back Byron, I talked about the Daytona 500, but then I also decoded two drivers for the coming weekend's race in Georgia. And the first one was Chase Elliott, who's from Georgia. But in that video, I explained how it was all connected to the numerology of Christopher Bell, who is a walking, driving Christopher Benoit riddle. And what do you know, guys? Who won the race at 16-1? Christopher Bell ended up winning in Georgia. And it all had to do with the number 1128. Last year and the year before that, I was doing these decodes after the race. But nowadays, I'm doing these decodes before the race. So while other people are out there trying to figure out who's going to win a game between two teams, I'm over here figuring out who's going to win a race out of 40 drivers using numerology. I don't know jack shit about NASCAR, dude. I'm not even sure which pedal's the clutch and which is the brake. But somehow, this schizophrenic crazy guy on the other side of the microphone here is winning astronomically in motorsports. And, you know, I don't like to brag or pat myself on the back too often, but maybe I should. Because this is getting outrageous. And every time I look at my channel, you know, I seem to be getting less views on my videos, which is funny now because there's a fair amount of people watching live. But understand, guys, this is the real deal. And we are just absolutely freaking crushing it. So if you're wondering about this week, I do have a beat on a couple of races. I did a post on IndyCar yesterday. And if you check out my Discord, I believe this points to the NASCAR riddle as well. So I think I have a pick. I'm going to probably let some of you guys in on that before the weekend arrives. But it's just incredible, and I just want to point this out, even though this video has nothing to do with motorsports. Numerology is very legit. And for years, everyone said, hey, if this is so true, why can't you predict the future? And now I predict the future quite regularly. So, I don't know. Maybe it'll end after this. Maybe I'll stop winning altogether after this week. But to this point, it's been absolutely insane. So, with all the numerology out of the way, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks to everybody for all the continued love and support. This work continues to survive because the community allows it to. Platforms like YouTube and other video sharing sites are not too keen on letting videos like this into their algorithm, but for some reason, it's still reaching the masses. So, all thanks and blessings to everybody who has supported the work and continued to spread and share it, because again, this is the real deal. Peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to you all next time. See ya.